English at Jamalpur Mahavidyalaya and a doctoral scholar of ILSR Kolkata. He completed his postgraduation in English from University of Calcutta in 2018 and his undergraduation from Ashutosh College, University of Calcutta in 2016. His MPhil degree was awarded by Jadavpur University on the submission of his thesis, tracing the influences on Bob Dylan, evolution of his music in the 1960s in 2020. His research areas include urban studies, popular culture and media, and modernist literature. He will be delivering his talk on migration of metaphors, making sense of music in the lives of the urban poor in Dhaka by Shumon Rahman, published by University Press Limited in 2024. Anurag.
Thank you, Ariko, for the introduction, and thank you everybody for joining us today for this book talk, and congratulations to Kaina on such a wonderful presentation. The book that I will be sharing with you today is a fairly new book which came out in January 2024, and it's by Shumon Rahman, Making Sense of Music in the Lives of Urban Poor in Dhaka, Migration of Metaphors. Shumon Rahman's work, The Migration of Metaphors, emerged from his own PhD topic, and it would take 10 years for him to shape it into the present form of a book released in January 2024. Meticulous insight into the life of the urban poor of Dhaka. This book is one of its kind, discussing their music in particular, and the intricately defined cultural identity of the set classes in the light of this music. Currently Professor of Social Sciences, Media Studies and Journalism, and the Director of the Center for Critical and Qualitative Studies at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. Dr. Rahman has been a student of philosophy, social sciences and a PhD in cultural studies. As a teacher, he has more than 20 years of experience in teaching philosophy, South Asian and media studies across Bangladesh and Singapore, and is also a prolific writer of fiction that has won him awards like the Commonwealth Short Story Prize in 2016 and Prothom Alo Borshoshera Boi in 2018, etc. As an academic, he has secured prestigious grants and awards and has been the leader in research relating to popular culture, music, cinema, fiction, critical and cultural studies, celebrity studies, health communication, urban studies, etc., and has been called a trailblazer in the topics relating to the urban poor communities. As discussed, this book is primarily born out of his PhD dissertation. His adjacent research published in various journals have also provided a stronger structure for this book. As a layman, one of the reasons for picking up this book could be the suave cover design, which stands out. Embossed printing of the title with an enchanting color gradient on a largely white cover really grabs the attention of the reader. The minimal black line drawing by cover designer Al Numan highlights the important elements discussed in the book. Primarily a shack, which is definitely located in a Dhaka slum, possibly Korail slum, which is one of the primary focuses of the book, which has been discussed at length. A boatman, which is a folk icon, a folk music group which can be made out from the silhouettes, the instruments that they are using, and a three-wheeled rickshaw, which is locally called Teen Chaka, and one of the most important issues which is addressed in the book. And finally, the cassette at the back of it all. These are pop colors, reminiscent of the art of Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein. The flamboyance hints at the vibrancy of the topic at hand. The energetic subcultures of the poor in Dhaka, which are simply unputdownable, originating from the music meant for them. Professor Rahman dedicates this book to Professor Graham Turner, Professor Emeritus, University of Queensland, Australia, who is also his PhD supervisor. He elaborates on Professor Turner's contribution towards his book further in the acknowledgement section. The content page is very thorough. It begins with a list of figures, tables and figures which are used in the book, acknowledgements, an abstract and a foreword. The main body of the book is carefully divided into 7 broad chapters. Each chapter is again minutely divided into subsections which deal with the different elements or facets of the broader chapters. The introduction, I think, is the broadest part of the entire book, and justifiably so, because here, as you can see, he takes us through a very detailed introduction to not only a research problem but to the community as a whole. And here maybe there will be some repetition of similar facts to the rest of the book, but it is very important for the reader to have a overall holistic understanding of what kind of a field that he or she is stepping in as he takes up the book. I will go through the introduction also as I discuss the book in greater detail than the other chapters, because I have felt that it is more necessary to do that in context of the book. So yes, so the first chapter is the introduction. The introduction, which is subdivided into 13 parts, and very detailed 13 parts, which is obviously one why the provocation, which is the reason why he took up this particular area of research, the research problems. Then he goes on to define the urban poor, and not only the urban poor but this urban folk music. He contextualizes this issue with the socio-political context. What is empathetic pop? It's a very interesting factor that we will discuss over the process. Expansion of media and technology through the ages, starting from gramophone records to the cassette industry to CDs, VCDs, DVDs, and then finally there is a hint of streaming again, something that we'll discuss. There are forerunners of this particular industry of the urban folk, if you're calling it. There are forerunners of this genre. Urbanizing folklore and folklorizing the urban, methodological considerations, a framework for analysis, field location and tools, and finally the structure of the book. The second chapter is the nexus, identity, music, and the urban poor. The third chapter is Baul revivals in Bengali pops, key historical moments, musicians on the fringe, the next chapter. Then we have the migration of the chapter, which is obviously the title of the book. Preferred and prescribed moments in music videos. Unruly, and finally the last chapter, which is a case study, Unruly Puppets Producing the Urban Poor in Teen Chaka, a television idol competition. Sorry. The book concludes with conclusion, bibliography and index. The acknowledgement section is detailed and highlights the key catalysts and personalities that enabled Rahman to work on these theses. Mostly these are friends. Here we get a glimpse of the man behind the words and the genesis of this project. He also mentions the standalone research writings pertaining to this book. He mentions Asian Journal of Communication, Journal of Migration and Culture, Journal of Creative Communications, Bonopangshu Jogajog, and International Journal of Asia Pacific Studies. He sheds light on the hardship of such long research on his family and humbly addresses Professor Deepesh Chakraborty, who has penned a delightful foreword for the book. This is the second most persuasive reason for picking up the book, which is the abstract. He's a very accomplished researcher, and the abstract penned by Professor Rahman is concise, clear, and crisp. It's a clear testament to the fact that the research work undertaken by Professor Rahman is of tremendous significance in understanding the cultural practices among a large section of the poor migrants in Southeast Asia. The foreword by Deepesh Chakraborty, University of Chicago, is quite a delightful endorsement of the work done by Professor Rahman. He highlights the newer elements of this particular research and the tone of this work, an important endorsement overall. The first chapter in the introduction opens with a subsection of the provocation, where the author takes us to the days of his development studies when he was learning about the slums of Dhaka. It was here where he was first surprised to see large collection of music and music players in the shacks of the slums, and realized that unlike the rest of Dhaka, listening to music was not a luxury to the poor folk, but an indispensable part of their everyday lives. So people who are not being able to acquire square meals through the day are regularly buying CDs or cassettes and are buying tape recorders and 2-in-1 players to listen to music. This is the first very interesting point that he has struck. So here he also was very privy to show how the slum was localized and how the cultural politics and music played a major and integral role in the formation of their identities. This realization that the author has led him to this particular research endeavor, and he introduces us to the world of urban folk in Dhaka. Very first, from the very beginning, he is calling this music genre a hybrid genre of music that is aimed primarily at the urban poor slum dwellers, popular in the squatter settlements and on the urban fringes. The ready availability of music listening technologies with the dominance of audio cassette and the restructuring of the music industry the urban folk became a popular phenomenon. The acknowledgement of this form of music and its subscribers is a big shift in the political identity formation of the poor, especially in a city like Dhaka, where half of the population dwells in slums. His research problems are communicated to us in the next section. Firstly, he offers a case study of a production company who produce urban folk music with its militia of performers, and how these performers relocate themselves through performances and negotiations with the organization and the cultural mappings of the city as well. Secondly, the analysis of certain songs, understanding if and how they explain the life of the urban poor in the urban slum over a particular time period. Thirdly, the case study of a televised reality show where he portrays the nature and impact of the urban folk on the poor of the visual media and to a larger consumer forum beyond the poor. Besides these factors, the author also tries to contextualize the hybrid genre of urban folk music in the episodic phenomenon of folk revival in Bangladesh or East Bengal during three important historical periods. Then on we find the definitions of urban folk music and urban poor, where Rahman lays down the structures, maneuverings and the limitations of these particular categories. Discussing urban folk music, he successfully attempts to distinguish it from pop or the synonymous modern or quote folk fusion. While the fundamentals of this music can be found in Baul tradition, it is again not the same as elaborately discussed later in chapter 3. Rahman questions if a mass-produced commodity, that is urban folk, music recorded by a particular artist, devoid of the community engagement, qualifies as the pre-capitalistic quote folk, or does it become popular? Then on, the urban poor are defined, and in turn the influx of poor migrants into Dhaka after the liberation of 1991 and the 1990s during the establishment of the garment industry is addressed. While the squatter settlers in the 1970s were male with no fixed roles in the social and economic dimension of the city, the 1990 settlers were women who wanted to be absorbed by the garment industry as sewers, cleaners, etc. These people encroached into the city spaces and gradually established the slums and squatter settlements, which remain a large part of Dhaka that is not formally acknowledged in the maps of the city still. The Bengali pop music that arose in the 1970s are departure from the highbrow, quote, Calcutta music. Calcutta music was popular music of the times, performed by Indian Bengali musicians based in Kolkata, like Hemanta Mukherjee, Manna De, Lata Mangeshkar, Shyamal Mitra, etc., and pro-classic Nazrul Rabindranath, etc. Fakir Alamgir, Azam Khan, James, popular musicians who made a mark during that era, all sympathetic towards the urban poor, had their points of departure from the cause of addressing the crisis of the poor. And the music they created remained pandering to the middle class as empathetic allies, but with nothing more than a sentimental outlook. The middle class was swayed, but they did not generate any new class of consumers for their own selves as well, the musicians. And this is what we are calling empathetic pop. They actually do not serve the cause of the poor, they just have an empathetic and a very sentimental outlook towards their position in the society. Now, the quote 2-in-1 radio and cassette players became a must-have for the urban poor, and it is a way for them to communicate with their ancestral homeland or village, from where they have migrated. The cassette with the recorded voiceover ability acts as an agency for the illiterate worker to return home to the village. And returning home, as we will see through the course of this book, is a desire and an inability for the migrant, and it remains a constant point of impetus that makes this particular form of urban folk persistent, resistive, and enduring. Anyway, the technology to circulate and listen to music becomes cheaper as cassettes come into vogue. With the television in Bangladesh being, quote, propaganda machine, as the author calls it, there was a pseudo-democratization of this medium as well, with private channels generating popularity. These channels were catering to the polished upper and middle classes and the quote polite pop music, which did not allow the rustic urban folk to participate through this medium for quite a long time. Now, the people who own these private channels are also very influential individuals who are in the topmost positions in Bangladesh policy making. So these are maybe MPs, or these are probably trustees or trust members who are indirectly or somehow funding the Bangladeshi government at that point of time. Therefore, the television also subscribes to their particular ideologies. And they have no space for, quote, this vulgar and unruly form of music that panders and caters to this absolutely urban poor and nobody else. The forerunners of urban music were paupers and migrants from rural areas of Bangladesh looking for jobs or aspirants in music, who gradually become informal street performers. The audio cassette in the industry took in personalities like Abdul Rahman for minimal amounts of money and distributed his albums to the growing market in the city among the urban poor. Now, people like Abdul Rahman who are gaining contracts from these Dhaka companies, music producing companies, are not given any sort of royalties. They are given a small amount of remuneration which is more like quote pocket money which the author uses. They do not have any long-standing contracts. So their entire income is based on performances that they do outside of the city, in the city fringes or in the rural areas where they visit. Again, they cannot stay back in the rural areas because they have to come back to the urban center to record music. And the recording of the music process is also very interesting. They are not going to proper recording studios and recording these at the expense of the companies who are providing them with contracts. They are self-financing these particular recordings. They are selling it to the companies, and the companies are buying it for a very minimal amount, and then they are producing it for the masses. So the entire industry is askewed, and the entire profiteering goes to the companies and not to these artists. And again, after being very popular, these artists are still relegated to vulgar and outsiders. Kanalini Sufia, Quddus Bayati, Mujib Bardesi all came from lives of struggle and became popular artists later. However, these artists had to rely on live performances in rural belts to generate proper income. The most popular name among them must be, I think many of us have heard here, is Mumtaz Begum, who became a star in the 1980s and brought a radical shift in the market of the urban poor. The author suggests a complex interplay between the urban and folklore. He adds urban music folklorizes the urban experiences and urbanizes the folk tradition. With the statement, Rahman takes us into the complicated politics of urban folk in Dhaka. Dhaka slums are not merely location but strategies. And folk music of Dhaka and the poor of Dhaka are products of each other. He discusses this in detail later as he writes elaborately on the ecosystem of the Shah Ali Shrine, which is located in Mirpur, Dhaka, northeast of Dhaka. Professor Rahman takes us through the intricate methodology issues of the research process. Thereafter, he also clarifies his framework for analysis. Dealing with songs, he emphasizes the sinological understanding of musical texts and their relationship with their subjects. He goes on to define his field location, the tools used. Moreover, he is careful to explain his decisions and choices, leading to fascinating narratives from the slums and the urban poor. The introduction is brought to a close by hinting at the contents of the following chapter. The second chapter of the book becomes an elaborate discourse on the question of cultural identity. Professor Rahman deliberates on the question of cultural identity from a wide spectrum of critical and cultural theories to develop a suitable and adaptable definition of cultural identity as a working hypothesis. He proceeds to connect the dots between this cultural identity and the different forms of music and how deeply they affect the lives of the urban poor. He is not concerned with the psychological perspective of cultural identity and is more concerned about the community identity rather than an individual one. He does not dismiss identity as a priori, nor he considers this to be pure fiction. Through the book, he constantly tries to locate and relocates its position between these two dichotomies. The nexus, as he calls it, is revealed, and Professor Rahman dedicates a lot of effort into reviewing another set of literature where the elements of urban folk music in Dhaka is compared to similar resistance music of migrants across the globe, which appeared around the 1970s and 80s among the urban poor, like Andean music in Lima, the Mizvid of the Kushid, of the Kurdish, arabesque music of the Turkish migrants, the Luktum of the Thai. Professor Rahman's integrity in debating the identity question is admirable as he tries to incorporate a lot of contradiction and conflicts into the discourse and expertly and patiently navigates through them. The next chapter can be argued to be a distinctive research all by itself. With so much already said about the urban folk music of Dhaka, the author here presents with a genealogical study of the genre, tracing it back to the mystic traditions of the Baul and its episodic revivals in the domain of pop culture. The author presents that there have been three significant instances of revival through history, each significant in creating a national or regional identity. The first among them was during the colonial era, when the Baul tradition, inherently resistant in nature, was used as a mode of protest against the division of Bengal. Rabindranath Tagore led this particular revival through his music. Now, the Baul community is an outsider to both the Hindu and the Muslim tradition because of their particular philosophies and their way of life. They are not accepted either by the Hindus or the Muslims, especially because, as the author focuses here, because of their their non-monogamous lifestyle, especially their extreme sexual and philosophical rites that they undergo. So Rabindranath here is very important because he is sanitizing and deodering the Baul tradition by adapting just their music but not their resistant and quote deviant and hedonistic lifestyles. The second revival was in protest of Hindu aggression and domination, where there was a need by the Muslim community in Bengal to grow and nurture a culture of their own. During this era, we see prominent musicians like S.D. Burman and Abbasuddin come up. While S.D. Burman finds later a career in Bombay as a music director, Abbasuddin is still known to rally a large number of people in Bengal and Bangladesh to the Muslim cause. So, this, however, the author suggests that this was not a very successful revival of the Baul tradition. The third revival is a direct opposition to the acrimonious nature of the Pakistan state, which was against the North Bengali Muslim brethren. Incidentally, all of these revivals allowed nationalistic sentiments to rise, starting from the growth of anti-colonial sentiment to pan-Pakistani Muslim nationalism to emergence of Bangladesh nationalism, with Baul music being the choice of certain communities in expressing dissent against the oppressive state systems. At the same time, the orthodoxy of the middle classes and the sanctity of the religious orders are also put to question by the Baul order. The language agenda also takes shape because of the historical formation of these revivals. The author hints at a fourth revival as Baul music, incorporated within the culture of the urban poor and their music, resists the oppressive power structures of the rich and the influential who coexist within the same boundaries of Dhaka. Incidentally, with passing time and through revivals, the tradition become less individualized and become more of a community phenomenon. So like initially we had the name of Rabindranath, then we had the name of Abbasuddin, but now as we progress through time, it becomes more of a community-owned phenomenon rather than an individual-led activity. The fourth chapter deals with a particular space in Mirpur, a rapidly growing suburban locality northeast of Dhaka. The narratives in this chapter are fascinating, which show how urban poor music is strategically and organizationally practiced by the urban poor in the Korail slum and the Shah Ali shrine in Mirpur. So I'll just give you some examples. Like for example, there are these performers are very professional in nature. So many of them might have small stores or shops or maybe automobile drivers in or around Dhaka. So they maybe, let's say that on Thursday nights they usually do these performances because Friday is a holiday in Dhaka. So on Thursday nights they close their stores early or they return from their occupations earlier, and they have a designated time of performance in the slums or in the shrine. So they either meet in empty construction sites in and around Dhaka as well. So here they come. Initially what happens is the audience starts to gather from the late evening and then the performers arrive. So and this goes on, the entire performances go on till the morning, till 4:30 when the morning adhan happens, and all of them participate in the morning prayers and then they disperse. So it's a whole night activity. And most of the performers in the Shah Ali shrine, they are not local performers within Dhaka. The local performers of Dhaka take up a more, the word passive role or the phrase passive role will not be a very right word because there are no passive participants in this kind of form of music. They are more sort of, they take up the role of helpers and organizers who help performers who are coming outside of Dhaka, from outside of Dhaka, to perform there. And these performers, they locate themselves a little further away from the shrine itself and start performing through the night. Meanwhile, as this performance is going on, there are consecutive and simultaneous other performances happening in and around the shrine itself. There might be some orphan kids who are performing, and the lyrics are very funny. The lyrics do not have any logical meaning to them because these are absolutely kids who are just thinking of words and on the spot and rhyming it and singing. And maybe they have siblings or cousins who will be dancing to these tunes and will be begging on the streets. Similarly, there are disabled people, disabled individuals who are accompanied by their family members who also sing and move around the shrine, and they also beg for alms. Initially, the performances start with a prayer to the to Shah Ali, who was a very notable Sufi saint who migrated to Dhaka in 1500s. Then on, it becomes a full-fledged, spontaneous performances. There are requests made by the performers, by the audiences to the performers, and they go on through full-fledged performances. Sometimes it even happens is that they resort to zikr. Zikr is a form of music, prayer, which is a continuous chant of Allah's name through the night. So it usually takes up this form. And why I said there are no passive performers, because the lines between the performers and the audiences are blurred, and all of them indulge in the performances altogether. So I'll get to that. The performative role played by this hybrid form of music blurs the line between the performers and audiences, the stars of the genre and their listeners, contrary to pop media. There is a part where the author suggests that maybe you're a fan of a particular urban folk musician, you're sitting at this shrine or maybe what they call a chai cake in Dhaka, and you may notice that the performer is sitting right beside you and he does not have any intricate stardom or inherent stardom in himself. So the role of the performer and the audience member in this particular form of music and performance is same and of the same strata. There is no outsider, insider, or there is no hierarchy in this particular form of art and this form of music. The performers or the audiences, the stars of the genre and the listeners, contrary to pop media, do not have any line separating them. The audience is an active part of performances, and the performances unite the audiences and performers spiritually as their identities merge into one as they start taking the name of the Almighty or delve further into this spiritual sort of music. A powerful symbol of resistance against all existing divides of human life preached in the quote authentic Baul tradition, which has found refuge in this quote hybrid mode of music. Interestingly, the shrine is not only occupied by performers and listeners, but also scouts. So this is how capitalism pervades into this very interesting, space, which is actually not separated from anybody. Anybody can join in. So anybody from the urban elite can also come and join, maybe from a distance, as a very passive listener. And if they like it, they can also join. And again, they will also not have any hierarchy, and they also will not be separated. So in this entire process, there are scouts as well, who are scouting new performers, which are called apprentices, and are signed to their record labels at minimal cost. We know how the contracts work now. The distinction with folk and pop becomes blurred even further as the performers themselves continue to differ from categorizing the genre of urban folk music. They are not comfortable with the tag of quote folk or quote pop. They interchangeably use the terms baul songs, light songs, and modern songs. Again, with the term modern songs, they are not comfortable. Practitioners cautiously distance themselves from the traditional baul music. The negation itself is a deterministic identity for themselves. There is a conflict between folk and pop beyond the performers as well. Folk is a communal effort where pop demands the acknowledgement of the individual, the creator and the composer. Baul tradition itself incorporates the name of the individual in its song and is beyond the scope of a communal effort. It is a pre-modern practice of modernity that celebrates the individual over the collective. Dualities thrive among the musicians of the fringe, and the question of identity, their space of belonging, also becomes very crucial to them. Now we finally move to the space of migration. Migration, as we will see, happens in manifold degrees in the book. Through close reading and analysis of 6 songs in chapter 5, the author illustrates how the migration of the urban poor from rural to an urban setting have allowed them to replace the established metaphors of folk in their urban music, influenced by the urban experiences. The metaphor migrates like their composers have themselves. However, the tunes are not changed to retain the familiarity which allows the composer or listener to encourage nostalgia about the past, which inevitably is tied to their idea, the very futile idea of returning home, an impossible task. How are the things changing? How are these metaphors changing? For example, youth in traditional folk songs or traditional baul traditions are seen to be leaves of colocasia, which are hydrophobic, and the water droplets which fall on them, they slide off. This image is exchanged with that of cigarette smoke, a cigarette burning out. the boatman, which is a very prominent figure in the Bhatiyali music genre, is replaced with a bus conductor or bus driver. The phenomenon of cricket is introduced in the modern folk, urban folk, and there is a dialogue there. In the book, a romantic song has been discussed, where the romance is taking place between it's a what do you call it, a heterosexual couple, a man and a woman, and they are discussing their love towards each other using metaphors of cricket. Test cricket, a long format, which means a long relationship or a long commitment. Some person is talking about, bowling, swing, spin, unplayable balls, no balls, white balls. So these terms come in to describe love. We have, and this takes up a format of a dialogue, which is a kobigan essentially. So the kobigan genre is replicated using cricket metaphors. We have erotic sensations, which is again a very dehodotto in Baul genre. The established metaphors of the river, of the fish, which is the soul and the body, they are being replaced by electricity. And all of these have very particular reasons, like electricity, like transformers, electric connection, load shedding. These words come up in the songs. Why? And these also have to do essentially with the socio-economic conditions of the people. In the Dhaka slums, correct, there is no legitimate electricity connection that is given to them. The Dhaka Electric Board gives them electricity illegally. The people associated with Dhaka Electric Board, the officers themselves, take bribes, which is a higher rate from that the normal people get, and they sell electricity to these people. So electricity becomes a very important aspect of the Dhaka slum life. Interestingly, Dhaka has a very high rates of load shedding, but people who live in the slums, they have different interfaces. So when one connection goes out, they switch to the other, and most of the people who are living in Dhaka are mostly daily laborers, daily workers. They work in the automobile sector, totos, buses, autos. They are drivers. So the bus and the auto image also keeps on recurring. Finally, one of the most important images that the author shed light upon is the word crossfire. So So again, in folk songs we have love and betrayal. So betrayal is being shown through the use of the word crossfire. Crossfires are nothing but what we call fake encounters. So the Dhaka slums are again home to drugs and murder and other criminal activities. And a lot of people, after committing crimes, they come to hide in these Dhaka slums. So a good way to bifurcate the judicial system is to conduct fake encounters, which is popularly called crossfire. So this crossfire phenomenon is also very common in Dhaka and Dhaka slums. So the word crossfire comes up when love and betrayal comes up in the song. So the 6 songs actually shed light upon these very dissimilar and very erratic words that are used, but they actually have a very big socio-economic connotation when they're used in the songs. Then the next chapter is of 2 music videos. One is a preferred one and the other is a prescribed one. So one is of Tishma, her displacement. Tishma is actually the name of a performer over there, and the other one is of Goni, the rickshaw puller. So the 2 music videos are about, one is about Tishma's displacement from the urban space, and she is visiting and to relocate herself in Dhaka with her uncle. And the second music video is of Goni, the rickshaw puller, who is in a love affair with an upper class woman. So the prescribed and the preferred moments which highlight these conflicts and cultural clash between the upper classes and the urban poor in the city. The true urban folk song promotes Goni, the rickshaw puller, as a strong, reliable urban partner. The preferred moment. So the rickshaw puller in Dhaka and in folk song has gone through various iterations. Occasionally in folk song we see that the rickshaw puller is being equated with Krishna, in Dhaka or in the Dhaka urban folk music. Even if we look at a very popular Bengali song from Kolkata, Ami Je Rickshawala, so that also sees the rickshawala as a lover boy who is detected in love. So the rickshawala as a lover boy is a very important trope that occurs, and but the rickshawala is educated. He is a migrant from a rural area. The only access that he does not have is to a job. Therefore, he is poor, but he is still a reliable urban partner. He is always suspicious of the lover who is from the upper class, because the upper class woman may betray him at any time. So he possesses this sense of jealousy and this sense of insecurity as well as suspicion at all times. So this is the preferred moment, and this is the preferred location of folk music among the urban poor. But what is the preferred moment? The Tishma, who performs the song, the other song, acts in a lookalike performance and is actually a pro-classic pop performer. She started her career as a Rabindra Sangeet singer. She was moderately accepted by the upper classes and the elite classes, and then she suddenly creates this kind of a performance. Why? Because she wants to indicate that Dhaka would be a better space without the urban poor and the slum dwellers. The prescribed moment is very ironic and contradictory. I'll go into this, but let me explain the music video. The music video starts with Tishma coming with her uncle to the city, and she suggests that Dhaka is very dirty. Dhaka is encroached by urban poor, and the music industry in Dhaka is askew because the quote-unquote standard of music is not up to the mark. So she wants to return back to her village. She is actually not a representative of the urban poor. She is rather an eyewash for the urban poor and represents the upper middle class and the elite who want the urban poor to vacate the spaces of Dhaka. So this is a prescribed moment. But again, this is very ironic and contradictory, because the educated upper classes want to reclaim the city from the other poor, which is the other half of the city's population. But on the other hand, they rely on cheap options like rickshaw travel, grocery shopping from their own verandas, from vendors who are selling vegetables on vans across neighborhoods. They want an access to a cheap garment industry and other cheap options. Largely, they interact with a city which is based on cheap labor by the migrants. Further, they want to reclaim the music industry, to which they have contributed significantly little. Here, the question of return to an ancestral home becomes a very debatable topic. Unlike how Tishma, with her space of privilege, suggests, returning to a homeland is a myth for the urban poor. The only way they can return is when they die, and the other slum dwellers donate to transport the dead person to their ancestral village. Korail Graveyard, one of the largest graveyards located within Dhaka, is mostly the graves of children who are born there and raised there, and when they die because of malnutrition or fires, which is a very common factor. Even in May 21st, 2024, there was a big fire which broke out in Dhaka Korail slum, and these are all premeditated. These things are basically arson, and this is done to vacate these particular lands and get rid of the urban poor by the authorities themselves. So a lot of children die in Dhaka. They do not have a quote ancestral belonging, so they are the only bodies which are put to grave in these Dhaka graveyards in Korail. The final chapter of the book provides us with the story and the case study of Teen Chaka, which is a reality music idol competition which was organized in 2008 by a Bangladeshi television channel. The participants were from an urban poor section working with Teen Chaka, literally meaning three-wheelers, that is rickshaws. After introducing us to the critical attempts to understand the television space for the poor and middle classes, Professor Rahman takes us to the research regarding Teen Chaka. He shares the story of his genesis and the popularity during the participation register process. So Teen Chaka as a reality show did not stay limited to the rickshaw drivers, but rickshaw pullers, everybody associated with the automobile industry, the urban poor, everybody who belonged to this particular category of urban poor also started registering. And the name was also changed later on in the process because of sponsors. Yes, a star and sponsor-studded affair, the poverty-stricken musical geniuses were made public spectacle. An entertainment cum education package for the urban elite through television. It was a distant, safe and sanitized encounter with the others of the city. The presentation of the urban poor in such a way that the intellectual and the moral leadership of the superiority of the elite are not questioned, rather reinforced. Vulgarity was taken away from the songs, and the TV space was one where safe songs were recommended for the performance. I will try to read out 5 conditions from the book that was given to these people for performing. These were the prerequisites of performances. Just a second. So these were the 5 conditions, how they were groomed and how they were recommended. Television, 1. Television is a gentleman's media. You have to be nice and presentable. Number 2. Don't use dialects or accents while talking on the stage. Let them show that you are no less than a gentleman. Number 3. A music idol should perform any kind of music. Likewise, he should handle any social situation he needs to enter. You have to be confident. Number 4. This being the on board as a contestant of Team Chaka, is the most precious opportunity you were ever given in your life. So try to make the full advantage of it. And number 5, do not arrive here wearing a lungi, do not lie to us, and do not borrow money from the television people. So these were the 5 conditions that was given before somebody signed on board. Akin to empathetic Bob, that was discussed earlier in the first chapter, there were educators and groomers for participants who needed to be presented unlike their selves. They must look, sound, or feel exotic, but be relatable to the sophisticated viewers. For the producers of the show is aimed at the upper and the middle classes, to generate empathy. For the sponsors, it is to reach out to non-viewers. The moderate success of the program was short-lived, and the short-lived fame brought in bigger identity crisis in the lives of the participants. So the eyewash was over soon. People understood that this was a blatant appropriation of their culture. So people stopped watching this program altogether. So the sponsors from Magic Tooth Powder, they set up the screens all across Korea and force-fed the people this particular show. They were not interested at all. Finally, it was discontinued. It was a pedantic attempt at prescribing how the urban poor should be, and was not a real democratization of the television as a medium, which could not accommodate the urban folk genre. The systematic exclusion of the vulgar, quote, vulgar urban folk genre in the show pointed at that. The discontinuation of the show is a testament to the fact that the urban elite and their endeavor to encounter and appropriate the urban folk music from the urban poor is a futile attempt at trying to negotiate with and humiliate the empowered community and culture. In Migration of Metaphors, Shumon Rahman crafts an incisive, informed and impactful narrative that does more than document the lives of the urban poor. In Dhaka, it offers to profound reimagination of their cultural identity through the lens of music. The meticulous research and detailed analysis presented in the book illuminates the intricate relationship between the urban poor and their musical expressions, showcasing how music serves as a vehicle for identity, resistance and community cohesion. The continuous presence and playing of urban folk music in small slum stores, CD-DVD shop or not, always enables the community to engage as listeners who work with the music influencing their sensibilities at all times. This activity is called listening otherwise, and the listeners are called guerrilla listeners. Rahman stands out for his interdisciplinary approach, seamlessly weaving together threads of cultural studies, musicology, sociology and urban studies. By doing so, he provides a holistic view of how the urban poor in Dhaka navigate their socio-economic realities through music. This music, which Rahman terms, quote, urban folk, is not merely an auditory experience, but a complex cultural artifact that encapsulates the struggles, aspirations, and resilience of the urban poor. The author's exploration of urban folk music, its genealogical roots in the Baul tradition and its episodic revival, offers compelling historical context. These revivals, as Rahman argues, were pivotal in shaping nationalistic and cultural identity of Bengal and later Bangladesh. By tracing these historical continuities, Rahman underscores the persistent role of music in form of cultural resistance and identity formation. One of the most significant contributions of this book is nuanced undertaking of the understanding of the urban poor's cultural identity. Rahman navigates the theoretical landscapes of cultural identity, incorporating diverse perspective and engaging with global analogs. The case studies presented in the book, especially focusing on specific locales provide vivid portrayal of the lived realities of the urban poor. Rahman's methodology's rigor is evident as detailed by his research process and framework for analysis. By locating his fieldwork within the broader socio-political economic context of Dhaka, Rahman provides a comprehensive understanding of the poor man's cultural practices. So again, I reiterate, as he had suggested earlier, the slums are not mere locations but strategies that underscore the agency of urban poor in shaping their cultural identities. The technological and media landscape, particularly the role of audio cassettes and television, reveal how these mediums democratized access to music and contributed to the cultural identity formation of the urban poor. Here I must mention that Mumtaz Begum and other several top-level performers of urban folk have later on conducted shows of their own, which has accommodated new up-and-coming urban folk musicians from the Dhaka slums. It's a seminal work that offers profound insight into the cultural life of the urban poor in Dhaka. Meticulous research, interdisciplinary approach, nuanced analysis makes this book an essential read for scholars and practitioners interested in cultural studies, urban studies, and musicology. He highlights the transformative power of music. He enriches our understanding of urban poor's cultural identity, challenges us to reconsider the role of culture in socio-economic and political contexts. It's a testament to resilience and creativity of the urban poor and a powerful reminder of the enduring significance of cultural practices in shaping identities and communities. So the potential areas of further study on urban folk music can be a future research area, broader application of Rahman's research in other urban poor communities globally. The book only hints at the idea of streaming. YouTube was still largely obscured when the book was penned. So how does free advertisement-laced streaming and free streaming change the market and cultural dynamics between the urban poor and urban folk music genre? So that can be a very new area of work, because when Shuman conducted this, Spotify was not a thing, and most of these performers have relocated to Spotify. You can publish your own songs on Spotify, and we see that there has been a wonderful change in the aesthetics, in the designing of the albums. The albums which are far more aesthetically pleasing to the upper and the elite classes. The cover art has changed. The recording mediums have changed. The technology to do with the recording process has also changed. I'll now go to a small anecdotal portion of this research, which is a rudimentary study of the likeness and the contrasts of urban folk music, mass movement songs, and later Jivanmukhi genres of West Bengal. This is to do with my particular research area and how this book has kind of complemented it. And suggesting so, first I must credit Shati ma'am, because she was the person who had actually brought this book to my notice when it first released. And thank you, ma'am. This has been an enlightenment, nothing short of that. So I'll just go to this area briefly. I'll just briefly touch upon it. So we know how Bangladeshi urban folk music works. So they all are of common origins. The mass movement songs, Bengali, Jivanmukhi Gan, and urban folk, they resist highbrow Bengali music norms and are rooted in folk traditions of Bengal. And each genre offers a unique response to socio-cultural and political context in Bengal society as a resistive force. So I've discussed Bengali folk, urban folk in length, so I will not go through it again. So the resistance music of the 1970s and the 1980s in West Bengal, often associated with the Naxalite movement and socio-political upheaval, differs from Bangladeshi urban folk in both intent and execution, despite having similar roots in folk music. Music from this period in West Bengal was explicitly revolutionary, with artists like Sholil Chaudhary, Hemango Bishwas. We also have Ruma Go Thakurata, who were creating songs which are overtly political, aimed at mobilizing the youth and resisting oppressive regimes. These songs were characterized by their direct, often confrontational lyrics and their use of both traditional and Western instruments to create a sense of urgency and rebellion. The audience for this music was primarily the politically active youth and intellectuals who were deeply engaged in the socio-political movements of the time. The leftist mass movement songs of West Bengal in the 1970s and 80s were deeply intertwined with the socio-political landscape of the time, reflecting their aspirations, frustrations, and revolutionary zeal for the leftist movements, particularly the Naxalite movement. These songs served multiple purposes, acting as a tool of mobilization, education, political education as well, so solidarity and resistance, with a multifaceted agenda encompassing political, social, and cultural dimensions. The primary agenda of the songs were political mobilizations, propaganda, as I said. The movement started in the late 1960s, the Naxalite movement, emerged to overthrow the existing feudal and capitalistic structures through an armed struggle led by peasants and workers. Songs were used as a propaganda tool to spread the ideology of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, glorifying the revolutionary struggle and denouncing the oppressive ruling class. Lyrics highlighted often the injustices perpetrated by landlords, capitalists, and the state, calling for an uprising to the established society based on equality and justice. The songs sought to inspire and energize the masses, particularly the youth, to join the revolutionary causes and participate to fight against the exploitation and oppression. Another significant agenda was the dissemination of political education. I'll just move on. Culturally, these songs aim to challenge and subvert dominant narratives perpetuated by the ruling class and elite. They resisted elitism of highbrow culture, which was seen as symbols of cultural hegemony. Instead, leftist songs embraced vernacular and everyday experiences of the common people, using folk melodies and traditional forms to create a sense of authenticity and relatability. By doing so, they sought to democratize cultural expressions and make it more inclusive and representative of the broader population. Leftist mass songs of the West Bengal in the 1980s and 70s plays a crucial role in social-political landscape of the time, and they were encapsulating their ideals and aspirations and providing a voice to struggle, and a way to voice the struggles and hopes of the oppressed masses. Jibanmukhi Gan, however, emerged in the late 20th century as a more modern and polished genre of Bengali music, particularly gaining popularity in West Bengal, India. Influenced by Western music, Indian classical music, and contemporary social-political movements, this genre was pioneered by artists like Kavi Shuman, Nachiketa Chakraborty, and Arjun Datta. The themes of Jibanmukhi Gan are deeply rooted in the everyday realities of urban life, addressing issues such as unemployment, corruption, personal freedom, and the complexities of human relationships. The lyrics are introspective, often reflecting the songwriter's own experiences and viewpoints, and the music blends the traditional Indian instruments with Western ones like guitar, piano, synthesizers. The genre caters primarily to the educated middle class, who are drawn to its sophisticated lyrical content and polished musical style. Unlike subtle references embedded in the folk song, very dualistic. Those songs are very dualistic in nature, but these songs might not necessarily be. They directly confront oppressive regimes and social issues, making a powerful medium for social and political commentary. In its approach to highbrow music, Jibanmukhi Gan does not want to step away from the light of it, but wants to dismantle the gatekeeping of elite artists, challenging the dominance of figures like Rabindranath Tagore, Kazi Nazrul Islam by democratizing music and making it more accessible to the common people. Their own music, like Rabindranath's music, should not be limited to a particular highbrow community, but it should be everybody's music. So that is the message that they are disseminating here. The precursors of Bengali Jibanmukhi Gan, that is Bengali commercial film music of the 1890s and 1990s, they share characteristics with the urban folk songs and urban folk music. These songs were widely popular and accessible, blending traditional melodies with contemporary styles to appeal to broad audiences, just like the urban folk music in Dhaka did. And while the Dhaka music was mostly oral and through audio, our commercial Bengali songs were actually film music, which was led by stars like Taposh Pal, Proshenjit, Chiranjit at that point of time, Ranjit Mollik at that time, and they were mostly made popular by the single lone screen standing theatre and cinema halls in the rural spaces of West Bengal. And so let's go into a comparative analysis that urban folk music uses subtle resistance to dualistic meanings, addressing relatable themes for the urban poor while rejecting highbrow music. One thing I want to add, that is because they were based in the Baul tradition, and Baul tradition was mostly looked down upon by what the author calls here, what the Bauls called mullahs, for which were Muslim fundamentalists and Hindu fundamentalists. Their songs in the urban folk genre needed to be dualistic. They needed to have a metaphorical element to it, so that they were not easily understood by people who were ignorant of the Baul lifestyle and the Baul hegemonies. So mass movement songs, they emphasize explicit resistance and political mobilization, engaging youth and intellectuals in socio-political movements. Jibanmukhi Gan focused on direct confrontation of social issues with sophisticated lyrics and music, appealing to the educated middle class. Jibanmukhi again is not very communal. It is like a true urban phenomenon. It promotes its individuality over than the community. Common goal is that all three genres resist the elitism of highbrow music, contributing to a more inclusive and diverse musical landscape. I will conclude now. In summary, while Bangladeshi urban folk music, Bangladeshi mass movement songs, and Jeevanmukhi all draw from the rich cultural heritage of Bengali folk music, they cater to different audiences to differ and serve different purposes. Folk music speaks to the urban poor. It uses familiar themes, dualistic meanings, subtly addresses issues of resistance and survival while rejecting highbrow music entirely. Mass movement songs, name suggesting, is more to do with class consciousness, mobilizing large chunks of the middle class and lower income groups to resist authoritarian practices and explicitly leftist agenda. Jeevanmukhi Gan, on the other hand, targets the educated middle class using polished lyrics and sophisticated music to directly confront social and political issues and challenge the gatekeeping of classical music icons. All genre in their unique ways resist the elitism of highbrow music, contributing to a more inclusive and diverse musical landscape. While the resistant music of 1970s and 80s, West Bengal stands apart with its overtly political stance and its role in actively mobilizing the youth during a period of intense socio-political change, contrasting with the more allegorical resistance found in Bangladeshi urban folk music, like a modern true modernist phenomenon, Jeevanmukhi functions to solidify the existential status of the individual in the urban center. So, thank you.
Enlightenment and nothing short of it. That's how the two talks can be summarized as in one bracket. I don't know if you understand, we don't usually have a thematic unity between this, but both of these talks can be summarized, can be contextualized within the field of critical media studies. So time for the questions and answers, please. So just hand over to the audience.